Hi, I'm Sheila Fain from LaMarsh Global.
And I'm Chantal Milloy, co-founder of Levvel. Sheila, when we chatted last, we were talking about the goalposts, weren't we? Current desired state, how important it is to really set that up for any change, big or small, whether technical or not, organizational or otherwise, to ensure that we not only know the framing of any change, but that we know when done is done, and the metrics that go with that. So what's really important now, once that's been set up, is it does become very evident, doesn't it, how the journey and the gap between current desired and how people need to go through that is so uniquely different for each group, at times each individual. And once we've done that work, we really start to understand the different things that people need in that gap and the things that get in the way, to help, for leaders to help their people through that. I think through how difficult it would be to even know that had we not have set up those goalposts. And I'm sure you see it a lot in your work, as I do as well.
For sure. I almost feel like that transition state or that gap is often just skipped over because we're so focused on where we're going to be someday, that, I think you mentioned it when we talked last time, that we sort of assume, not actively assume, but act as though everyone is going to experience that transition in the same way. Take something like, an ERP implementation. It's fairly common that your finance department might be a bit more automated and used to automation than, say, shipping and receiving or some areas of the supply chain. So the impact is different across those groups. The impact can be different within a particular group, even department to department. And it's so critical to understand those differences and where you need more support, where you need less support, right? So you can kind of fine tune your plan and your resourcing. Don't go full force at a team that's kind of doing okay with all of this. And it's a different system, but not going to be that big of a deal. And ignore your shipping and receiving clerk that's working off of sticky notes on their desk, right? And has little sense of anything like that. And we're going to be expecting them to barcode everything and place things differently and just, completely upset the way that they do their work.
Yeah, that's a conversation I'd like to have, right? At this point with clients over and often, is about you only have the time you have, because we don't want to managing change to be perceived as slowing things down, right? So if we know that the gap and the journey for the different groups is different, and now we've taken the time to see, to your point, that it's going to be more difficult for some and less, we've only got the time, the resources, the money that we have. And we want to reduce that risk in priority order, if you will. Mm-hmm. So let's go to the group that is most impacted. And only if we've done all this work would we even know that, So to your point, if it's shipping and receiving, or it's that frontline team there that's going to be the most impactful in this change, let's block in some time to do the extra things needed for that group, whether it's extra training, extra leadership support, on the leader showing up and being more visible more often, reinforcing the right behaviors, extra communications to ensure they're feeling good about what they're learning. That's the only way you can really know to do that. And then you almost feel assured that you are going to reduce risk where it's needed most and first.
Right. There's another critical risk assessment piece that enables is there are unintended consequences that can occur while a change is being made. And if we understand how the different groups are impacted, we can predict those and do something about it. So let's just say that my job is to manage invoices, process invoices. And today I can process about 10 invoices in an hour's time. So that's my productivity. And that impacts the satisfaction of our customers because, or our vendors, because they're getting paid, right? The invoices are getting managed and they're used to that pace. So in the new way, I have a couple more steps that I have to do. And I'm just learning something different. And through practicing, testing, simulating, we gathering data from other organizations, we predict that for a period of 2 weeks, Sheila's going to only be able to do 6 invoices in an hour instead of 10. Well, that's a 40% productivity dip. Maybe it's not that dramatic. Maybe it's a 20% productivity dip. Can we tolerate that? Can the organization tolerate that? Can the people that receive the outcomes of those invoices tolerate that? Or are we going to be taking any financial hits? Are we going to be taking any in the way of like penalties or anything? Are we going to reducing satisfaction? Am I going to feel bad because I'm not doing my job properly? What do we need to manage through this dip in productivity or satisfaction or efficiency, whatever it is that we can predict? But we can't do those things and help manage through those unintended consequences to either the employee, because I could get a negative mark on my performance review during that period if we're not cognizant of the fact that this is something that's being induced by the change. It's an unintended consequence, and we're either going to accept it and say that's going to be a rough patch, or we're going to plan to make that less deep or less severe, reduce that unintended consequence. The management of this piece all needs to happen in the transition because that's when you experience it. And very often we pay no attention to that. And it can be some pretty impactful stuff and even make it look like the solution's not working, when in fact the solution we implemented is working just fine. This was a predictable consequence of going through the change.
Yeah, and I've got a great example in that productivity dip space. Certainly in my past life as leading change in past organizations in call centers. When I think about a call center environment and some of the metrics that some people are held to, average length of call or average call handle, being one of them. And we saw in some particular changes where that certain allowable average handle time was absolutely going to increase when this new technology was rolled out. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't looked at in the sense of a leadership group preparing the group of agents to say, we know that your average handle time is going to go up when we do this change because it's going to take you that much longer to get through that call, as a practical example. And when that work is done in the productivity dip space, and ahead of time we know that as a group of leaders, what can be done is possibly looking at their commissions. So this is where working with HR teams and being close to change, because that's going to impact now people's pay. If we just say, well, you're not meeting that measure anymore, therefore less commissions in this area. What could we have done as a group of leaders if we'd anticipated that in the change? Maybe taken the average commissions that they receive over the last 2-3 weeks prior and awarded that through a 2-week period or a 3-week period, because we've agreed as a group of leaders that the productivity dip will likely occur for a 2 to 3 week period. Mm-hmm. If we do that work, that's where the work in the gap and defining some of those things becomes critical to managing change well. And we don't often think about what goes on in that gap and then leading up to the day of the change and what it's created.
Right. The other critical assessment during that time period or heading into that time period is what else is changing in the environment, because we're not held static. There are other changes being introduced into that environment. And I could imagine in the situation you were talking about, that team is likely hit with multiple changes at the same time. Is that advisable? Well, if you've just put plans in place to kind of manage that dip to be less severe, but there's 4 other changes happening at the same time, are you right back where you started, or are you worse? What's your experience been with that?
Yeah, it's so many times. And I know you and I talk about this all the time, but let's say you have those 4 projects and multiple changes happening at once. Mm-hmm. And the importance of not only understanding this gap or this dip for one, but all of them in a coordinated effort of maybe the 4 leaders across those projects, let's say. Because without knowing it, one project's goals are basically wiping wiped out by the other project. So yeah. In the call center example, the project that I'm a leader of a group, and the project that we've just implemented is actually meant to reduce handle time. Mm-hmm. Okay, by this day or by this week. Great. And then another project that's launching slightly staggered to that during the same period where we expect to see that get under control is actually increasing the handle time at the same time that the other project is supposed to be reducing it. So there's an example of how without that coordination, without understanding not only the gap of the project you're involved in, but your co-leaders and what are the other changes going on in the organization, we're going to assume that the project we had is not meeting the intended results.
Right. And maybe there's an opportunity to do some different timing and sequencing, or it could be that, they both run their course, but we know that the desired state metrics are not going to be achieved until a later time period than what we thought because of these, 2 efforts. It may also change a bit about what you're doing in those projects if it truly is that they are working against one another. So there's a lot of things to discover by doing that work that can ultimately lead you to a better place.
Yeah, and in that space of multiple changes too, and looking at those changes in a coordinated effort, it's a great exercise to do in a top leadership group. Whether it's at the executive table, and sometimes the intel for that will absolutely come from middle line managers, frontline managers. And sometimes the overwhelming piece of trying to get a hold of that is just in the nature of, oh, wow, there are a million things going on here. So it can't be seen as a futile effort. And so I know that sometimes a great place to start on multiple changes is look at the change that you're accountable for. Let's say there's a group of leaders we're working with. Start there as yours at the center. Understand the timing, understand, what your project looks like. And then just look around you, left and right, with peers, with those in your circles to say, what else might collide with this? It can often just be as simple as that, because otherwise it can be an overwhelming exercise. Are we really about documenting everything in the organization that's changing at the same time? No. Right. You're looking for things that are going to get in the way of the change that you're accountable for leading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to the best of your ability, because we're all at different states of readiness to do something like that, capability to do something like that. But to your point, it can be a simple conversation. If I can get a handle around my portfolio of change, then can my peer do the same thing or not?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're leading into a really good topic for next time we chat on how do you assess risk? Because we've talked about the goalpost, we've talked about metrics against that to know when done is done. And then now, today's discussion on the gap and how different that is for people and what you need to get a hold of. But how do you actually go about assessing the risk to reduce the risk in a change? And I think that would be a really great topic for next time.
Sure, absolutely. Let's talk a bit about how you gather that data and what are the most critical success factors. I think that would be great.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day. We'll chat soon.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.